Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here, and today we're going to go through second quarter delivery and production forecasts ahead of quarter end, which ends tomorrow. And then we should get Tesla's numbers sometime on Friday as my expectation, may slip into Saturday, but based on the last few quarters, I think that'll happen probably Friday morning. So we'll obviously be back to report on that, but today we're just going to go through what I expect, my actual forecast for this quarter based on the information that we have so far. We also have a little bit of other news, so we'll hit that up after the end of the forecast. We'll start off here with Tesla stock. Oh, before we get into that, if you are an audio-only listener, this is spreadsheet intensive, so I'll put the link down to the video in the show notes. I would recommend that for this one. All right, so Tesla stock today fading off a little bit to finish down 1.1% to $680.76. That compared to the NASDAQ, which was slightly positive on the day, finishing up about 0.2%. So before we get into deliveries, let's look at what Wall Street is currently expecting. And it looks like that is about 198,300 vehicles to be delivered in Q2. This is as of June 25th from an investors.com article. So that's the best source I have right now for FactSet consensus. Before we get into my actual spreadsheet though, just a reminder, I tend to focus mostly on production rather than deliveries. These cars are all going to get delivered eventually. So to me, production is key, not how many of those vehicles that Tesla produced they were actually able to deliver. So we're going to spend most of the time talking about production, but I will talk about deliveries as well. So let me flip over to Excel here and we can just orient people with how this sheet is set up. I think by now most people are familiar, but we basically have periods of time here in the rows, different sections of production here in the columns. So total, Fremont, Shanghai. And then we have it split out by sort of rates. So weekly rates, daily rates, and then some breakdowns over here of just individual factories and their weekly rates. So hopefully this is large enough that you guys can see it. I may zoom in on a couple different things here, but hopefully this is big enough. So the reason we're going through this today, and I figured, might as well just hit it now rather than waiting until tomorrow, is because we did get the May China production numbers late last night. So this was reported on Twitter by Moneyball D. Couric from Gascu. Tesla's production in China in May was apparently 36,861 vehicles. It didn't quite hit those rumors that we had heard of 44,000, 45,000 produced in May, which is not surprising since deliveries came in quite a bit lower than that. But it does just serve as a good reminder that not all of those rumors that we see reported on pretty heavily end up being true. So unfortunate, but we did end up here a little bit lower. That being said, it's not all that far off of the scenario that we had gone through back on June 2nd. So let me just flip over to that quickly here, just on my other tab. And you can see that the hypothetical that I went through at that point in time, which was based on Model Y production really accelerating, had us at about 38,000 for May. And again, that wasn't a forecast, it was just a hypothetical, but not too far off that number, which I said would have been very strong. So I'm actually pretty happy with this 36,000 vehicles produced in May in Shanghai number. You can see that on a weekly basis that comes out to about 8,300, daily basis about 1,100, 1,200. And the split there for the Model 3 and the Model Y was about 15,000 Model Y produced and about 22,000 Model 3. So we really saw that jump that we had talked about. It looked like there was another shift of production for Model Y added from April into May. So that really boosted the weekly production rate for the Model Y up from about 2,000 a week in April to about 3,500 per week in May. As for the Model 3 in Shanghai, we saw production drop off a little bit in May on a daily basis, or a weekly basis rather, from about 5,100, which, as we had talked about previously, was basically the highest we had seen since last October for Model 3 production on a weekly basis. That did regress a little bit more to kind of what we saw in Q1. Q1 was about 4,800 per week. Then in May, we saw about 4,900 per week. So that's kind of where we're at. As I said, pretty good numbers. Let's go into my forecast here then. So we'll start off with June, and I think probably the best way to start here is looking at the June Model 3 and Model Y forecast that I've got in here, as well as the weekly rates. And I'm going to change one thing here in a second based on some information that we have. But if I click in here, you can see the forecast that I'm using. I'm basically just taking the weekly rate from May for both. And I'm saying, okay, maybe Model Y increases by a little bit. As I said, we did have that production. We had the rumors that they added another line of production for the Model Y from April to May. So I'm just assuming that that was our big step up and we're not going to continue to see huge growth. I'm basing that kind of on the step changes in production that we saw for Model 3 ramp up in Shanghai. So when we saw Model 3 take that huge step, it was sometime, Q2, I think last year, maybe Q3. It went up, and then the following months after the huge step, it kind of just leveled out. So I'm projecting a little bit of a similar scenario here for the Model Y on a weekly basis from Shanghai. So that puts me at about 3,400 per week. Model 3, then I just have at the same weekly rate, so pretty simple. Again, that's pretty close to where they've been operating if you average out kind of the last 6 months. So I figure might as well just leave it around that level. Seems like a pretty good spot to estimate. So that being said, there is one thing that I think we need to change here, because remember, we did have rumors that there was a production holiday, or there was a holiday that may have limited production a little bit for about 5 days there. Oh, sorry guys, I'm so sorry about that. It looks like I was covering it up. So let me just recap those numbers really quickly here. So I have about 3,460 Model Y per week from Shanghai, about 4,900 per week from the Model 3 in Shanghai. And those are pretty close to what we had seen in May. So again, based on what I was just saying there in terms of the, kind of leveling out after that step change in production that we saw in May. So the one thing that I do want to make sure that we notice here though is that holiday that we had in the middle of June, where it was like a 5-day holiday, but Tesla apparently took alternating shifts where they still had people come in, but they allowed some people off. So I do think that's going to impact production. It's not going to be like Tesla was down for 5 days, but I'm going to say that maybe it ends up being about a day and a half worth of impact to production, just based on that rotation schedule. So what I'm going to do here just to kind of show the effect of that is, let's just say that there's 1.5 fewer days in the month, and let's see how that affects these rates here, which my math didn't work out as I expected it to. So bear with me 1 second here as I figure out what I need to change in my formula. Did those numbers lower? They did not. All right, classic live stream scenario here. Just give me a second. Okay. So they did change. For whatever reason, my weekly rates there didn't change, but we've got about, okay. I'm just trying to make sure that you guys can see this. So assuming we had these rates of production for June, pretty similar to May, and we had a full 30 days in June of production, we would have come out with about 15,000 Model Ys and about 21,000 Model 3s. If we take the time out, take that day and a half out, then we end up being at about 14,000 Model Ys and about 20,000 Model 3s. And again, that's based on pretty much those same weekly rates, just accounting for a little bit of, production downtime there with that holiday and some of the workers being off. So that's my estimate for Shanghai for Q3. Let's just see how that comes out in total here. Make sure those math is all aligned there. Puts us at about 37,600 Model Ys and about 63,700 Model 3s. So a little bit up from Q2 for the Model 3, and quite a bit of an improvement there from Q2, from Q1 for the Model Y, about 20,000 more units. So as we can see here, then if I look at the total quarter, total Shanghai, that puts the total quarter at about 101,383 total from Shanghai. Ends up being, on a weekly and daily basis here, about 7,800 per week. I'm just gonna change this back quick. Yeah, about 7,900 per week and about 1,100 per week, per day. Okay, so 101,000, okay. Sorry guys. Give me just a second here. Let's make sure all the math is right. I kind of set this up in a weird way to account for that production downtime, and I'm having trouble keeping that straight in my head, but we're at 101,400 for Shanghai. So now let's get into Fremont, and here it's a little bit we have a little bit less information to go off of because we don't get those sort of monthly updates like we do in China. We just have a lot less information to go off of. Really, we're just kind of looking at, how many ships there were and things like that, and just trying to keep track of any news that may come out. You may remember that in Q1, Tesla did have a period of time for maybe 3 or 4 days there where they had production shut down because of, it seemed like, part shortages. It was kind of around the time of the really bad weather in Texas that had a lot of power challenges. So remember that Q1, our base here, did have that impact, and though Q2 we continued to hear about supply chain challenges, we didn't hear about any production shutdowns that I can recall. So with that in mind, let me just unhide the forecast here for Shanghai, and I'm just going to hide the daily stuff here because that's not important. So for Model Y, I'm at about 52,000. That's a little bit of an increase over my estimate of about 48,000 for Q1. The reason for that is because Tesla did say in the Q1 shareholder letter, I've got it up here on the side, they said, quote, "In Fremont, Model Y production continued to ramp successfully and is approaching full capacity." So there should still be a little bit of room for Tesla to increase Model Y production. And then again, we didn't have that, couple days of downtime, or we didn't have any reports of that this quarter. So we need to add on to that. So if you look at my formula here, I'm just saying, okay, as a reminder, we do have 1 extra day in Q2 from Q1, so we need to account for that, 91 days versus 90. So I'm just saying take that into account and then add 6-7% from having those 2 to 3 extra days of production. And then plus continuing to ramp up. So I think the so the shutdown, that was probably about a 2 to 3% impact. And then if Tesla continued to ramp up, saying maybe that they got another 2 to 3% out of the Model Y ramp up there. So adding on about, 7% between those two things. So that gets me to about 52,000. As I said, about 4,000 more vehicles, Model Y vehicles for Q2 than from Q1. As for Model 3, pretty simple logic there. I'm just taking the rate that we had in Q1, doing the same math of multiplying it for that extra day. And then I'm just adding on 2% for not having to account for those shutdown days. So as you can see, there should still actually be a little bit of upside there for the Model Y or the Model 3 forecast. I'm at about 55,000 units, and in Q4 and even Q3 before that, you can see that Tesla produced about 57,000, 58,000. So there would still be some room here, but we continue to have those supply chain challenges, and because of that, I don't want to be overly aggressive, but it wouldn't surprise me if Fremont production outpaced these levels. Then for S and X, we just don't really know. So I have 750 in here. Obviously, we've seen a couple of lots being filled up with Model S vehicles. We don't really have any Model X yet that we know of, aside from a couple that were at that event. So this number could be higher. What I'm not clear on is why those vehicles aren't being shipped out yet. So Tesla may not actually be counting all of those as finished vehicles if they're sitting around waiting for one part. Tesla will just count that as work in process inventory rather than finished goods. And finished goods are what they're going to report here on the production line. So this is a big question mark in terms of why those vehicles are sitting there. But I think they're probably somewhere between 500 and 1,000. I think Elon on the call said that they were doing several hundred per week. So I could be low on this. Remember, this is production, not deliveries. But again, I think it's better to be conservative and assume that those vehicles are sitting there for some reason and not count them as finished quite yet. So that being said, let's add in Fremont here. And let me display the weekly rates. So I've got 107,441 from Fremont between S, X, 3, and Y. And that gets me with Shanghai production to a total production forecast for Q2 of 208,824 vehicles. So if we look at the growth year over year and quarter over quarter here, it's pretty incredible. Remember last year we did have a lot of shutdown from pandemic related shutdowns. So last year Tesla in Q2 produced about 82,000 vehicles. The 208,000 here would be up 154% year over year. And this would be a 16% growth quarter over quarter from Q1's 180,000 vehicles. As for how that splits out between the factories, quarter over quarter would be about a 6% increase for Fremont and about a 28% increase for Shanghai. So, well, actually, let's make sure that's, yeah, okay. So Model Y would be the majority of that, obviously. and then really good growth year over year for both factories. So that's where I'm at. As for deliveries, one thing I did want to mention here, just on the Model Y, I'm just seeing my note here, Model Y and Model 3 from Fremont. So these are combining for about 107,000 vehicles. Tesla in the Q1 earnings report, and even going back further than that, has stated the capacity at 125,000 vehicles per quarter. Now their capacity, they're going to have some downtime, things like that throughout the quarter, in any quarter, and they're never going to hit that full capacity. Well, shouldn't say never, but we shouldn't assume that they can hit that full capacity in every quarter. That being said, 107,000 with capacity of 125,000 per quarter totally seems reasonable to me. So again, I wouldn't be surprised if they beat these numbers, but just with all the supply chain stuff that we've heard about, I want to try to be a little bit conservative with my forecast here. All right, so for deliveries, again, I don't really care too much about these. I haven't really spent much time going from my production number to my delivery number. But if we scroll over here, you can see deliveries just for the past, 3-4 years, and how inventory has fluctuated in those individual quarters. So this is just deliveries and then production minus deliveries here. So you can see the last couple of quarters, Tesla's actually been working down their inventory. In other words, delivering more vehicles than they produced. They can't do that forever. Inventory is super low. So I'm expecting that this quarter we will see inventory increase, especially with the China situation. It just seems like we don't have as many deliveries as vehicles that could theoretically be produced. We'll see about June production, but I think it's better to expect this to revert this quarter just because of kind of those things that we've been hearing. So I'm thinking around 6,000 vehicles, potentially more produced than delivered. Maybe we'll get a little bit more information on that as we see delivery information kind of come in various different countries over the next couple of days. But that's where I'm at right now. So that gets me to 202,824 deliveries as my forecast for Q2 at this point in time, which 3 days left probably till we get the numbers. Hopefully won't change too much. So thanks for bearing with the spreadsheet walkthrough there. I don't think there's anything else left to point out here. Yeah, looks like we got all of that. So let me just flip back to Safari here. I have one comment that I want to make on this point. So this is maybe the biggest cause for concern in my forecast, I would say, especially when it comes to that delivery number. So this is from Tesla Shanghai. We had talked about this on a previous podcast episode, and they were forecasting just 25,000 vehicles delivered in June in China and 0 exported, which would seem to imply a production level around 25,000, and I actually have around 34,000, 33,000 for June from China. So I could have some liability if this number is correct. This is just his personal forecast, his or her personal forecast. So, maybe not great to put much weight into it, but they have been pretty accurate with the numbers that they have leaked in the past, which is why I just give it, a little bit of credence or credibility, and it gives me a little bit concern. Not enough to change my forecast based on that. Just something to be aware of as you're kind of interpreting my forecast is that doesn't necessarily align with some of the information that we're seeing here, potentially. If this export number is higher, then that could solve it. So it's not something I'm concerned about. And Tesla could just build up inventory too. As we said, very low inventory. They'll sell the cars eventually, as I think the China situation will probably tend to resolve itself. So let me know in the chat if you've got questions. I know I kind of went through that. I'll try to keep an eye on it as we go through the rest of this episode. But just a couple other things I wanted to highlight before we wrap it up. So first up here is a tweet from Elon Musk last night. So he's saying that in regards to the vision-only operation of Tesla Autopilot, that, quote, production release update coming this week, which includes raising max speed to 80 miles per hour. Sorry, 75 mile per hour limit was done as precautionary measure. Turned out to be unnecessary. So remember, normal Autopilot, that's restricted to 90 miles per hour. Tesla with vision only put that down to 75 miles per hour. They also didn't do smart summon. And of course, some of the safety features like lane departure were not there at the start either. So looks like we've actually got a super quick update on this today on Reddit. This has been posted. So 2021.4.18.10 firmware does have that emergency lane departure avoidance being re-added, as well as smart summon also. So looks like Tesla is quickly making progress in terms of restoring that whole functionality, and that has been a win for them today with safety ratings. So a couple stories in one here. First off, IIHS, Safety Rating Institute, has restored Tesla's top safety pick plus rating on the Model 3 based on their retesting with the Vision system only. They've confirmed that automatic emergency braking is working with the Vision only system. So they've restored that top safety pick plus. I'm not sure that we've seen an update from NHTSA in terms of safety ratings yet, but I would imagine that would be quickly following after this as well. So with that, Model 3 has regained Consumer Reports top pick status. They had previously removed that just because they didn't have that safety rating data available yet. So a couple of pieces of good news that certainly will not get quite as much attention as it did when Consumer Reports took that top pick rating away. But that's all right. All right, next up here, just a quick update on Giga Berlin. So this is coming from Land Brandenburg. They keep us updated on all those, all this court situation there and approvals and permit statuses and things like that in Berlin. So they have posted here that the Administrative Court of Frankfurt rejects urgent application of 2 nature conservation associations against approval of plants and machine tests for the Tesla plants there in Berlin. So this means Tesla can continue with their permitted work to test the equipment that they've got in Berlin right now. If this approval had been, or if this request had been approved, then Tesla would have had to at least halt that or shut down their testing. So from Tesla's perspective, this is a win. They can continue to test that equipment, which definitely should, help with the timeline. And it looked like this whole thing was settled pretty quickly. I think they had filed this on June 11th. So nice to see something going through the process relatively quickly and Tesla not having to sit around and kind of wait for it for so long. All right, next one here. I missed this yesterday. Thanks to those of you that pointed it out in the comments. I had it on my notes, but I completely just missed it. But shout out to Unplugged Performance and Randy Popst. They took on Pikes Peak with the Plaid Model S this last weekend. I think that was on Sunday. And Randy won the exhibition class. So Plaid Model S winning that event with a time of 6 minutes, 57 seconds, which at first looks like it's a record because the Volkswagen IDR set the previous record at Pikes Peak with a 7:57 time, 7 minutes, 57 seconds time. However, a portion of the course was closed due to weather. So this was just a time for a portion of the course, but again, still won the exhibition class that it was racing in. Still an excellent time. Unplugged Performance thinks that they would have run about a 9-minute 20-second time with if it had been the entire course. Obviously just their projection based on how they ran so far. So still, it doesn't take away anything from the time. That's still an amazing time. I'm not sure what the record for a production vehicle is. The IDR is not. So if anyone happens to know that, let me know. But I saw for like production SUV, it was like over 10 minutes, something like that. And this would be a record for an electric production vehicle for sure. The previous record for an electric vehicle, production vehicle, was I think the Model 3 Performance, which again was maybe in the 10 or 11 minute range. So definitely a really strong performance for the Plaid Model S. And then last story here, this was as I was getting ready to record today or to go live today. So, or I guess it came out earlier, but that's when I saw it. US regulators require crash reporting of vehicles with advanced safety systems. So CNBC actually having a fairly tolerable headline here compared to some of the other ones that I did see out there focusing on Tesla. But basically, NHTSA is asking that any crashes involving level 2 or beyond driver assistance systems need to be reported to them within 1 day. So it's not just Tesla, it's all automakers that have any sort of advanced driver systems. So here you can see that there. So they're just trying to make sure that they can monitor things as best as possible. I'm kind of surprised that this wasn't the case already. I'm sure most of them are being reported to NHTSA. I think it's more of just making it a requirement now, firm requirement now. So what I'm not clear on yet with this report is if this means that these reports are going to be made public, or if it's just something that the companies privately report to NHTSA and that is held internally in NHTSA. So we'll just have to do a little bit more digging on that to figure out if this is going to be public. If it is public, the media is going to celebrate, because of course then they can monitor any sort of crashes like this. But my hope is that it's just internal with NHTSA until things need to be made public. Okay, so I'm just going to pop through the chat here quick, just to make sure that nothing's going too crazy. I do apologize for covering up the some of those numbers with my camera there. Try to keep an eye on that stuff. And I suppose let me just flip back to Excel while I am looking at some of these questions here. In case anyone's joining late. So I am at 208,800 vehicles produced in Q2 and deliveries of about 202,000, 203,000, let's call it. And again, I know people on Twitter and Reddit and things like that are going to use this number here to judge my forecasting capabilities. That's fine. It is what it is. But again, I don't put much weight in, I don't spend much time forecasting this. I don't put much weight in the actual number. To me, this is what's really important, the actual production number. That's what gives us insight into how the rest of the year is going to go for Tesla. Like any individual quarter, I don't really care too much about. The only reason I care about it and the only reason that I do these forecasts is to give us context for how things are progressing. For example, like when we're talking about Shanghai, we saw this huge step up from April to May, from 2,000 vehicles per week to 3,500 vehicles per week. That gives us a ton of insight into how the rest of the year is going to go. So that's why we need to know what's going on with production. If we see a huge beat on this, then we can go back to this and say, okay, what was different? Was it June China production? Was it Shanghai production? And based on that information, we can then have a better understanding of how Q3 is going to go, how Q4 is going to go, and maybe how Tesla is going to look in 2022 as well. So that's what's really important, not necessarily if this ends up being, within 1% or something like that. Although, as long as it's higher than that number, I'm great with it. It's always fun to be on, but certainly a beat would be better. All right, just glancing through the chat here to make sure. Some people asking what my bullish numbers are. I don't really do my forecasting in that way. If you were to strictly look at capacity, I've got 107,000 vehicles here for Model 3 and Model Y. Capacity is about 18,000 more vehicles than that. I wouldn't expect Tesla to be at that full capacity, but maybe they could be, 5,000 above this, 5 to 10,000 above this. Shanghai could maybe be, if I'm overestimating the impact of that short little holiday there, or if Model Y continues to ramp up, which I'm not really forecasting, that could maybe add another, 3, 4, 5,000. So in terms of upside here, I'd say maybe it's 10 to 15,000 vehicles, but I'm not forecasting that for a lot of different reasons. I would love it if it happens, but my forecast is kind of my forecast. Deliveries, that's just a wild card. I wouldn't be surprised if this was, the inventory buildup here was 10, 12, 15,000 vehicles. The most we've ever seen, it's happened a couple times, is around 14,000. Q1 last year, obviously that was the start of sort of the pandemic shutdowns, and Tesla definitely wasn't able to deliver things because of that. Same thing in Q1 2019, which I'd probably have to go back and try to remember the context on that one. But we have definitely seen, 12,000 there. I kind of highlighted Q2s here. You can see that it just really hasn't been consistent between building inventory or reducing inventory in those second quarters. So we don't really have much context to go off of there either. I think the best thing we can do is, just kind of look and say, okay, there's only been one time in this 4-year period where Tesla's had 3 quarters in a row where they've, reduced inventory. So it's not impossible that deliveries could outpace production, but I bet if we went back and looked at these 3 quarters here, we were starting with probably a lot higher inventory, and that kind of gives you a hint for that there, although sort of the same line up there too. So yeah, I wouldn't expect necessarily a build, but the variance here could be, the differences here could be pretty high. It could come in anywhere from 208,000 to 195,000, and I wouldn't really be surprised on that. For me, again, it's the production's the first number I'm going to look at. All right. I did see a couple of super chats here. That's really small in there, but thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. And I think a couple just came in. Apologies if I missed these. Okay, so Tactical Tesla here asking, what about the new Fremont Y line? Is it just intended to be a place to set up the Y refresh, Berlin Austin 4680 flavor? Any news on when it will be in production? So I assume this is talking about sort of that new tent that's been going up in Fremont. To be honest, I haven't looked at that in, I don't know, maybe a month or so, but I'm not sure that that's going to be a big contributor to Q2. Maybe that has more of an impact in Q3. I'm not exactly clear on what Tesla's planning to do in that other than potentially, General Assembly of Model Y. I assume it's the current version, so probably not anything to do with 4680s. But you never know what Tesla's doing. Just because they open up a new General Assembly line doesn't necessarily mean production is going to go up, because they could be shutting down another one at the same time. So until we see a little bit more on that, I'm not going to put that in my forecast. And again, I would point back to the Q1 earnings letter where Tesla said that they are production continued to ramp up successfully on Model Y and they're approaching full capacity, versus Shanghai. They said that we're continuing our production ramp. It was different language there, so I'm not expecting huge growth from Fremont. Though I do have some here, which I do think is pretty reasonable. I've got about 6,000 more vehicles from Fremont. You can see that here. And again, we do get that extra day, and we don't have those production shutdowns. So my hope is that's conservative, but if they're kind of at the Q1 rates, they should be able to hit that with those factors considered. But good question. All right. Thanks, Carson, for the super chat. All right, I think that gets us through everything then. So I know kind of a long episode today and could have been a little bit smoother with some editing, but appreciate you guys bearing with it through the live. Definitely saves us some time, and I'll continue to try to get better at them. But that'll, I suppose, do it for today. So as always, thank you for listening. Make sure you're subscribed and signed up for notifications. Make sure you hit the like button on the way out. I think our ratio is a little bit lower than usual right now. I'm guessing because I was covering those numbers up. So I appreciate any help